Hello, Gainesway Community Center. I'm David Arnold, author of a few books, which we're going to talk about here shortly. It's November, almost December 2020. I've got the man bun to prove it. I call this my quarantine cut. I know a lot of you, maybe you guys don't have man buns, but I know many people are sporting many different hairstyles these days. But I apologize for the crows, and if my kid, 8-year-old kid, runs around behind me, this is just life right now. But we're going to talk books, we're going to talk writing. I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about how I became an author and the long path to becoming a published author, as well as specifically the strange fascinations of Noah Hypnotic, as well as talking about the process of writing. And yeah, I hope that this is a fun time that we can have, if not in person, at least in the virtual world. And my ultimate goal is to not be boring, so I hope that I don't bore you, or at least I hope that I'm less boring than the other things that you're doing today. So, here we go. I spent, all of my high school, college, and then most of my 20s attempting to become a rock god. Didn't work out. But right out of college, I moved to Nashville. I was in multiple bands. I ended up with a home studio and produced and recorded a lot of music, some of which I'm proud of, some of which not so much. But it was a really formative time. It was a time where I really learned the importance of community, surrounding myself with like-minded creative individuals, and the value of making something. It's pretty magical, the idea that you would create a thing that wasn't there and now it's there. It didn't exist and now it exists, and that's because of you. And that was something that I really was able to sink my teeth into, primarily with my music, when I lived in Nashville. And then one day, my wife and I found out that we were gonna have a baby, which was not part of our plan. My wife had this great job at the time that had wonderful benefits, and so long story short, it was decided that I was going to be a stay-at-home dad of our newborn baby, and she was going to continue her job so that we could continue to, eat and be able to go to the hospital when we needed to. But yeah, I couldn't record music with an infant in the room. So that was really when I was 29, 30, super old, is when I transitioned out of music into writing books. And that's kind of when I first started getting serious about writing. My first book is, I don't know if you can, the light, there we go. My first novel is called Mosquitoland. I wrote almost all of that book. It took 2 years to write. I wrote it during the 6 months leading into the birth of my son and the first year and a half of his life while I was taking care of him. Half the book is told in letter formats. Those letters are essentially me writing letters to my infant child who was in the room with me. So if you read the book, as you're reading the sections that are in letter forms, spoiler, it's basically just me writing to my son. I wrote this book assuming no one would ever read it, assuming nothing would ever come of it. That's kind of how you have to go about it, especially when you're writing a novel. It feels like just an impossible thing that anyone would ever publish it or care to read it, or that it could ever be a job was just not something that I had really considered. I was, however, involved in a writing community in Nashville, and I became more involved with that community as I got more serious about Mosquitoland, about the writing process in Mosquitoland. And I do feel like each book, to a certain degree, is a reflection of where you are at that time of life, and Mosquitoland is no exception. The main character's name is Mim. Her experience is very different than my own growing up, but who she is, how she thinks, her voice is very similar to who I was, and in a lot of ways still am. And then, as I talked about the letters being written to my son, I never could have written this book if I wasn't taking care of our newborn baby. So Mosquitoland was very much a reflection of who I was during the time when I wrote it. And then, I ended up, shockingly, getting a literary agent, and the agent sold the book. And so 3 or 4 years after I'd really gotten serious about writing, much to my shock and surprise and many, many tears, found out that it was going to be published, and that was a really, really just a cool experience. One other thing I do want to mention is, I feel like I'm going to talk about this a little bit more during when I talk about process, but I do think that some books feel more like a purging. It's like you're just getting it out of you, and it just flows, and there's nothing you can do about it. And then other books feel more like a construction. And this is just for me and my own experience. I've now, my fourth book comes out in February, and my first novel, Mosquitoland, and my third novel, The Strange Fascinations of Noah Hypnotic, were both very much purging books. I sort of sat down, I figured out who the characters were, and I just kind of story. And I don't want to say easy, because I don't care how you write a book or what book you're writing, it's hard. Writing a book is hard. But I think those are maybe a little bit, for me at least, the purging books are a little bit easier. And so then that leads me into my second novel. So Kids of Appetite is my second book. And it was not a purging experience. It was a constructing experience. If you talk to published authors, many of them will tell you, not all of them, but many of them will tell you the struggle of writing your second novel. And for me, that was definitely a struggle. You have your entire life's worth of inspiration and of ideas and of who you are and of where you came from to pour into your first book. And that's very much what I did in Mosquitoland. So then it's like, okay, cool. What else you got? And you're like, well, I just dumped my entire life into this book. I don't have anything else. I have nothing else. And so Kids of Appetite, my second novel, was a constructing experience. I had to build that book piece by piece. So it did take quite a bit of time, but just a completely different process than Mosquitoland. So then right around the time I was ending the writing Kids of Appetite, my wife and I we were still in Nashville. We were living there almost a decade. We were looking, we had this kid who at the time, I'm terrible with timelines. He was a toddler, and we were ready to be back home. Home for us is Lexington, Kentucky. It's where both my wife and I are from. And so we were looking for a way to move home, which led to The Strange Fascinations of Noah Hypnotic. This is the hardback, and then this is the paperback. They're both very colorful, and I really, really love those covers. I've said this before, and I think it still holds up. My fourth book, I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute, but Noah is my most personal character I've ever written. I've said before that if you read the book and you like it, then you like me and we can be friends. It's not that you have to like my books for us to be friends, by the way. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm simply saying that if you like Noah, then you're gonna like me because I am Noah. Again, the experiences that he goes through in the book are not my experiences. The book is complete fiction. In fact, it's speculative. There's a little bit of a sci-fi twist. I don't want to spoil anything, but so everything he goes through, it's not like I went through those things too, but who he is and how he sees the world and how he views the world is me. It was a very personal book. It was a purging experience. I had refilled the well. Again, I'm terrible with timelines, so I'm not going to try to say when all of these things occurred, but here are some things that happened that led to me writing Noah Hypnotic. The seed for the idea of Noah Hypnotic came, I want to say it was in 2010. My wife and I went on a cruise. There are cruise people and there are non-cruise people. I learned while on a cruise, both of us did, that we are non-cruise people. So anybody who's been on a cruise, it sounds like fun, like you're on a boat, there's a bunch of food. The thing about cruises though is that you eat what they give you and you go where they tell you. It's a boat, you're literally trapped. You can't, unless you like jump overboard, which I don't recommend doing. It wasn't a great experience for us. Some people love them, and that's totally fine. I'm not judging cruise people. One of the reasons that we realized we really weren't cruise people was every night, you would go to dinner, and then after dinner, there was some usually very sort of lavish evening performance. And one of those performances was a hypnotist. He has different people come up on stage and he hypnotizes a bunch of people. And one woman got hypnotized, and when she came out of hypnosis, it looked like she had no idea where she was or how she got there. Now, because it's a cruise and you're not going anywhere else except around the boat, I ran into this woman on the boat throughout the course of the week, and that look never left her face. So the idea was, what if you were hypnotized and when you came out of hypnosis, you were in like an alternate universe? That idea stayed with me for a little while. I wasn't really entirely sure how to make it a novel. That was the only thing I had, was that idea. And then, again, because I'm terrible with timelines, I don't know when this happened. At some point it occurred to me how much more interesting it would be if you were hypnotized, and when you came out of hypnosis, you weren't in an alternate universe, you were still yourself, and everyone you loved was still there. It was just that everyone was dialed like slightly off center. So in the book, Noah's mom has a scar on her face that wasn't there before, and she won't talk about it. And their dog, who's like knocking on death's door, is suddenly lithe and like catching frisbees. So that to me was far more interesting, was a character who was hypnotized and came out of hypnosis, and everything was just like not quite what it was before. And that I thought, okay, this is something I could really have fun with. Other inspirations at the time that I was really into, I don't know if anyone has read Haruki Murakami. I love how he writes two characters in a room just talking for pages. I love how he writes, they're almost like surrealist paintings. I mean, when you read Murakami, it feels a little bit less like you're reading a book and almost more like you're looking at a painting. It's all very colorful language, and it feels realistic in the moment, and then something will happen or somebody will say something and you're like, wait, what? And so I was really inspired by Murakami. I'm obsessed with the artist Elliott Smith. He's my all-time favorite artist, and so all of the scenes that I wrote about Noah talking about Bowie are basically how I feel about Elliott Smith. I do love Bowie now. I'm a big Bowie fan. So I think I mentioned that I wrote most of Noah Hypnotic either as we were moving home to Lexington or right after we moved home to Lexington. I should say my wife and I, and at the time I think our 3 or 4 year old son, were staying with my parents while we house hunted. So I ended up writing large swaths of the book while sitting at the desk in my room at my parents' house that I grew up in, where I had done my homework in high school and where I had played guitar in high school. And so again, and as far as like books being reflections of who you were when you wrote them, it was impossible for me not to really channel my inner 17-year-old while writing this book at the desk where I was a 17-year-old. So I'm gonna spend a minute talking about my friend Adam Silvera. If you guys haven't read his books, you absolutely should. Buy them, check them out at the library. However you get books, go get Adam Silvera's books. They're brilliant, and he's wonderful. He's also one of my best friends. He's a tall, gay Puerto Rican. If you've read Noah Hypnotic, or if you're about to read Noah Hypnotic, Noah's best friend is a tall, gay Puerto Rican. I did that for, the obvious reason being Noah is so close to who I was. I really wanted his best friend to be one of my best friends. And it was just too fun to write. Adam and I are constantly texting, and so many times we'll be texting something and I'll think, this should be in a book. So this was my opportunity to lift those texts right off of my phone and drop them into my manuscript. I'm only half joking. It was really important to me. I rarely have like an agenda or like anything that I really want my reader, like a message. To me, that's not what fiction's about. It's great when readers get those things, but as the author, I sort of bristle at the notion that I'm trying to like push some message across. But there is one thing that I'm sort of unapologetic about, and that is writing vulnerable boys. I feel like so many problems that we have right now in our country and in our world are men behaving badly, men who think they can do what they want, men who are just terrible people who I think probably were given whatever they wanted as a kid, or at the very least, they were told, you're not allowed to be a soft boy. And I was a soft kid. I cried a ton, I loved hard, and was loyal to my friends. I just feel like if we can have more boys who are allowed to be vulnerable with other boys in books than in real life, we'll have fewer men who feel the need to put on some masculine show of strength. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. nothing anyone ever wrote in the beginning was ever any good. Everything sucks in the beginning. And I think one of the mistakes that certainly I made, and that I talk to a lot of young writers, and one of the mistakes that I hear constantly is they quit before they finish it. You know, if you're writing, then presumably you're a good reader. And if you're a good reader, then you can spot bad writing when you see it. So if you're writing something and you recognize it as bad, then you're going to quit because you're like, well, this is bad. I must be a bad writer. And so inevitably, you don't finish the thing. Think of your most favorite book by your most favorite author and realize that at some point in the creation of that thing, it sucked. It did, I promise. And the only reason it doesn't suck is because the author continues to work on it, and hopefully it sucks less and less and less until it doesn't suck at all. And I just think one of the biggest mistakes young writers make is they don't finish something. So I would really encourage any young writers who are watching this, if you're writing something and you don't love it, that's totally normal. That's a completely normal response to a thing that you write. Every writer experiences it. What not everyone does is say, I'm gonna finish it anyway. So I would encourage you to do that and not worry about making it perfect. Just try to finish. And then you can always go back and make it suck less as you're going on. If you're writing something and there's no urgency felt, that you don't feel any urgency while you're writing it, nobody's going to feel any urgency while they're reading it. So it's just really important that if you're going to commit the time, and I encourage you to commit the time to sit down and write, whether it's a novel or a short story or a poem, make sure it's something that you feel some sense of urgency about. And that doesn't mean you have to rush. Urgency, it doesn't mean you have to hurry up and do it. It just means a sense of, I have to do it. No matter how long it takes, this is something that I have to do. You know, I've mentioned so my fourth novel is called The Electric Kingdom. It comes out February 9th. It was a constructed book. I'm incredibly proud of The Electric Kingdom. It is a reflection of who I was when I wrote it and of the time and space that I was in when I wrote it. But again, it was a constructed book. It didn't just flow out of me. But that's something I've recognized about myself, which is whether I'm purging or constructing, those are things that I've recognized are normal and natural and in all four cases necessary to tell that story. And one's not better than the other. So for me, it's purging and constructing, and I don't know, it might be a completely different process for you, but I think recognizing those processes and then not dismissing something, you know, maybe you're writing something and it feels different than it did with this other project, or it's going in a different way than it went with the other project. That's fine. It can be, different books need different things. So I know I've talked a lot. I feel like I've rambled. I hope this has been helpful. If anybody has any questions, you can feel free to email me. My email is davidarnoldbooks@gmail.com. I am going to close by reading something that a friend of mine, Jason Reynolds, wrote in a book called For Everyone. It's actually a speech that he gave that was so brilliant, not surprisingly, Jason is brilliant, that his publisher published it as a book. This book I've bought for people. I recommend constantly, especially for writers or really artists of any kind. But like I've said a lot, and I hope that it has been helpful, as I mentioned. But writers, like things that writers do in terms of like allowing themselves to suck, claiming their authenticity. Writers just write. I mean, if you're a young writer, just claim it. Say, I'm a writer. You can aspire to be an author. An author is a job that you can have. Writing is something that you do. You don't aspire to write. If you write something, you are a writer. Sorry, that's another TED Talk for another day. But I want to read this excerpt from Jason's book, For Everyone. It's essentially about the last thing that I think writers do, which is that they dream. If you are anything like me, you hope it never stops. You hope the bubbling never dies down and the yearning to break out and break through never simmers. You hope the voice that delivers the loudest whispers of what you envision never silences, that it never cowers behind fear and expectations that other people strap to your life like a backpack full of bricks or books written by experts. Because if it did, if it disappeared, if the voices vanished and you were no longer overtaken by the taunts of your own potential, no longer blinded by a perfect vision of your purpose, no longer engorged with passion, what would happen? Well, I guess nothing. And to me, there is nothing scarier than nothing. Even when nothing seems to be going right, or nothing, capital N, seems to be going right, I'd rather be bothered by the loud knocking on the door inside. Even though I answered years ago, the knocking continues. I'd rather my appetite be whet by a teaspoon of almost there every now and then. I'd rather suffer from internal eczema, constantly irritated by the itch of possibility. There have been many anxious nights where darkness has slept around me, my friends cocooned in a coziness I have yet to meet. My eyes swollen with exhaustion, my body sputtering on its own way down. But my dream won't stop crying, screaming like a colicky infant. Sometimes I think it needs to be changed. Usually it just needs to be fed. So writer's dream, writer's right, give yourself permission to suck. When this whole thing ends, I'd love to come say hey to you guys, and maybe meet up for coffee around town or something. But yeah, thanks for listening to me, and stay safe.